The market sector of Raylon 5 was quiet that night. It always was after the late freight drop. The rain fell in sheets that shimmered like cold silver beneath the flickering neon, pooling in cracked Duracrete gutters and steaming where it met exhaust ports from old power cores. Captain Elias Ford moved with a practiced calm, his boots splashing through puddles, shoulders squared under the weight of his field jacket. He was a soldier without a war, a man who once walked battlefields and now wandered corridors of peace, aimless in the silence that victory often left behind. He didn't know why he went to the outer edge of Sector B that night. Perhaps habit. Perhaps some instinct honed by years of combat, the same kind that had saved his life too many times. Perhaps it was simply that he had nowhere else to be. The world had healed, but Elias hadn't. He passed beneath a broken sign hanging from rusted wires above a long-defunct commissary, its letters half-lit, spelling Aaron's noodles in broken human standard. And there, in the alcove beneath it, slumped against the wall as though she had simply run out of motion, was a woman, alien. Not one of the common traders or licensed migrants. Her skin, a subtle violet gray, shimmered faintly even in the low light. Her limbs were long and elegant, her frame too thin, too still. Her eyes were half closed, but opened slowly as he approached, glowing faintly with that pearlescent gleam native to the Lurian species. Wanderers, artisans, displaced by decades of interstellar conflict, she didn't flinch as he knelt beside her. She only looked up, hollow and resigned, like someone who had already learned not to expect kindness. "You all right?" Elias asked. Her voice came slow, cracked. "I will be, if I survive the night." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a cry for help. It was just a truth, uttered without drama. Her body was shivering, her cloak soaked and clinging to skin that looked too fragile for this planet's chill. Beside her lay a bundle, no, not supplies, he realized. Just rags, wrapped around a single piece of dry bread that had turned to paste in the rain. Elias felt something shift inside his chest, an old gear catching again after too long rusted. He unzipped his coat and, without asking, draped it over her shoulders. She flinched once, then froze, staring at him. "Come on," he said. "I've got a place not far from here. Dry walls, hot tea, no tricks." She looked at him, unblinking. "I'm not asking for anything," he added, voice quieter now, "just offering shelter." Still, she hesitated. He didn't beg. He simply waited. And finally, with emotion so careful it hurt to watch, she rose. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she stood, eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked in silence through the neon rain. Elias didn't ask her name. Not yet. He figured if she wanted to give it, she would. For now, he would give her something rarer. A place, and perhaps a chance. The house was tucked between an old repair depot and a faded surveillance post that hadn't worked since the end of the Third Outer War. It was simple. One level. Metal siding, sealed windows, a comms dish Elias never used. Inside, the lights warmed automatically as the door slid open, bathing the room in gold. The woman stepped inside and blinked at the warmth. She didn't move past the threshold until Elias motioned gently. "Go on," he said. "You'll catch death standing there." She walked in, cautiously, her body tense in a way he recognized from soldiers. Not fear, readiness. She was used to being chased or cornered. "Seats clean," he said, gesturing to the couch. "Bathrooms through the left hall. Heat's real, water too." She sat slowly as if afraid the cushion would vanish beneath her. Elias set about making tea, pouring boiling water into the old ceramic mugs he rarely used. He added a ration tube of mint, stirred, and handed it to her. She took it in both hands, staring at the steam like it was firelight from a forgotten dream. "My name's Elias," he said, breaking the silence gently. "Captain Ford, if you care about titles, I don't." She sipped the tea. Her fingers trembled slightly around the mug. "Mira," she said finally. "My name is Mira." He nodded once. "Good to meet you, Mira." Another beat of silence. "I can leave in the morning," she added quickly. "I just needed somewhere dry." "You're not being thrown out," Elias replied. "Stay until you're back on your feet. No rush, no debt. No one does anything for free," she murmured. "I don't do it for free," he said. "I do it because I remember what it feels like to be starving and alone." She looked up at him then, eyes narrowing. "You? Not all soldiers are fed on medals," he said. A silence fell between them again, this time not awkward, but real, heavy, honest. I used to be an artist, she said suddenly, as though testing whether her voice could say something personal without breaking. On my world. My hands built sculptures that floated in air. I came here looking for work. My ship failed. I sold everything, ate nothing for 3 days. You'll eat tonight? Elias said. She nodded, silent again, but her lips pressed into something that might have once been a smile. Later, after she'd showered and wrapped herself in dry clothes he had no idea would fit so well, she stood near the window, watching the city. Elias stayed in the kitchen, pretending not to watch her watch the world. She spoke without turning. I don't know why you helped me. I didn't know why either, he answered. And in that shared confusion, something settled. Not love. Not yet. But the early weight of gravity, pulling 2 lives out of orbit, slowly into each other's reach. The following days passed like dust on glass, quiet, slow, accumulating in gentle layers of routine. Mira stayed. Not because she asked to. Not because Elias told her she could. She simply remained, moving like wind through the corners of his life, soft and unspoken. Each morning, Elias woke early to run diagnostics on the outer perimeter defense systems. He never told her she had to do anything, never once made her feel like she owed him presence or purpose. But every morning, Mira was there. Either seated by the window, sipping tea, or quietly cleaning a part of the house he hadn't touched in years. She never overstepped. She never asked for more. She never touched the spare room he'd offered her either. Not because she feared him, but because she didn't seem to want the distance. Instead, she slept curled on the couch beneath the faded emergency blanket he'd pulled from storage the night she arrived, her head resting on a rolled jacket, her sleep light and precise, like someone trained never to dream too deeply. Elias began to notice the little things first. The way she hummed without realizing when she cleaned. The way she paused before every meal, as if remembering a table full of people who were no longer there. The way she kept her back to a wall in any room, no matter how safe it was. He didn't ask questions, not yet. But he watched, and Mira watched him back. They ate together, spoke little, not out of discomfort but necessity. There was something sacred about the silence they shared, something people who had known real grief understood. Words often got in the way. Their conversations, when they came, were short, sincere, like music between long notes. On the 5th day, Mira handed him a strip of cloth she'd found tucked in the edge of a storage bin. It had once been part of a flag, tattered and sun-bleached. This belonged to someone, she said. It did, Elias replied. Do you want to talk about them? No. Then I'll clean it, gently, with a care that reminded Elias of how relics are treated in temples. That evening, Elias found her by the back deck, staring out at the red moons rising. He joined her, hands in his pockets, gaze on the horizon. The air smelled of copper and cooling soil. This planet's never quiet, he said. It is when you're not afraid of it anymore, she answered. He turned to her. You're not afraid anymore? She met his gaze. No. I think I'm just beginning to remember what safe feels like. He didn't respond, but he stayed beside her. And when she reached out, brushing her fingers against his, not clutching, not demanding, he didn't pull away. That night he found the couch empty. She had taken the spare room after all. And something in his chest both ached and exhaled at once. It was raining the morning the message came. Not the lazy kind of rain that tapped on windows, but the hard, slanting kind that soaked your bones and made the whole city feel like it was weeping. Elias stood in front of the comm station, a faded towel around his neck, his skin still damp from his run. The console blinked with an alert. Incoming. Encrypted. Priority personal. Origin, Earth Command. He tapped it open. A familiar face appeared. Colonel Breck, stern and gaunt, with eyes that had never lost their battlefield sharpness. Captain Ford, the colonel said without ceremony. Your request to retire has been formally approved. Status has been updated to civilian, effective immediately. Elias didn't move. Breck continued. You'll still have access to the pension grid and former officer clearance, but you're off the ledger now. No more orders. No more missions. The message ended, and for the first time in years, Elias Ford was no longer anyone's soldier. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he heard her behind him. You've left them. Mira stood by the doorway, a mug in hand, her voice unreadable. They left me first, Elias said. Still, she replied, stepping into the room, it's not easy, cutting the last thread. He nodded. I thought I'd feel lighter, he admitted. You will, she said. But first you'll feel hollow. That's how healing begins. He looked at her. You've done this before. She sat down across from him. I've walked away from what I loved because it stopped loving me back. Yes. They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, What will you do now? Elias looked out the window. Rain slid in slow rivers down the glass. I don't know. Plant something, build something, stay. Mira blinked. Stay? Here, he said, with you, if you'll have me around longer than a warm meal and a safe roof. She stared at him for a moment that stretched like the space between stars. I'm not a guest anymore, she said finally. I'm not waiting to leave. Good, he said, and then he stood, walked to her, offered his hand, not to take hers, but to offer his. Her fingers slid into his palm, and the contact was quiet but unshakable. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them had to, because in that moment, beneath a rainstorm on a broken planet far from the worlds that had carved them into who they were, they chose something neither of them had expected, to stay together. The rain didn't stop for 4 more days. It streaked the dome glass like veins of mercury, a silver curtain that sealed them into their own little world. The house, once just walls and shelter, had begun to feel like something different, like memory was being etched into the corners. Not the kind of memory forged in trauma or survival, but in presence, in choosing to remain when you didn't have to. Elias had always been a man of systems, maintenance, structure, patterns. That was how he'd survived war. He fixed what was broken. He stayed ahead of chaos by controlling what he could. But Mira didn't function in systems. She moved through rooms like poetry, flowing instead of calculating, touching things not to correct them, but to understand them. Elias was learning the shape of her presence. How she left flowers in recycled glass by the sink, how she placed her tea mug upside down on the counter after washing, how she sang sometimes when she thought he was asleep. And Mira, in turn, learned his silences. How he always touched the doorframe when he entered a room. How he never let a tool rest unclean. How he stood on the back porch every night before bed, looking up, saying nothing, as if waiting for something out among the stars to acknowledge his breath. On the 3rd day of rain, Mira returned from the market with a small bundle of soil clutched in wax paper and a metal tray she'd bargained from a vendor. She placed it on the kitchen table, carefully pressed the soil into it with her bare hands, and then opened a cloth pouch filled with deep green seeds that shimmered faintly when caught by light. What is it? Elias asked, drying his hands. Sereth vine, she said, smiling at the memory. It doesn't grow straight. It tangles, climbs, loops back on itself. It thrives best when left to wander. That sounds chaotic. That sounds like life, she corrected gently. He watched her cover the seeds with a precise layer of soil, fingers slow and deliberate, her mouth moving in a whisper, perhaps prayer, perhaps ritual. When she finished, she looked up and met his eyes. You don't have to understand how it works, she said. You just have to believe something will come from it. Elias didn't respond, but he nodded. Later that night, he placed a small heat lamp over the tray and adjusted the humidity controls. She didn't mention it, but the next morning, she made him tea before he asked. The days kept coming, and so did the habits. He taught her how to calibrate the old filtration unit in the garage. She taught him how to cook something called yarn broth that simmered for hours and filled the house with the scent of herbs he couldn't pronounce. She painted a tiny mural on the storage room wall, a cascade of silver leaves dripping from a dark sun, and when he passed it that evening, he touched it like it was sacred. They had never kissed, never said the word love, but it had grown between them all the same. Like the Sereth vine curling in the tray by the window, reaching always toward warmth. The skies cleared on the 7th day. The rain pulled back like a curtain, revealing a washed, clean world, drenched in color, crisp and alive. Birds returned to the ridgelines, the street vendors reassembled their booths, and life resumed on Raylon 5 with the urgency of a world that had never learned to pause. But something in the rhythm of Elias and Mira did not resume. It deepened. They walked together through the market, side by side now, no space between them, no hesitation in how their shoulders brushed or how she reached to steady him when he slipped on a slick metal step. He bought her a pair of gloves, black, armored at the knuckles, elegant in design. She examined them, brow arched. "They're combat grade." "You told me once you used to fight," he said. "I told you I used to flee," she replied. "Same thing sometimes." She smiled, tucked them into her bag, said nothing more. That evening, a message arrived. Elias watched it blink on the console screen for several long moments before opening it. Mira was in the kitchen, humming again, peeling root vegetables with the practiced ease of someone who had done far more difficult things in her life. The message came from command, not an order, a request. They needed a veteran officer for a peacekeeping outpost on Garen 2, short-term, temporary, but well-paid, well-respected, a return to something familiar. He didn't reply, not yet. Instead, he sat at the table and waited. She noticed his silence, she always did. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't lie, didn't dance around it. "They want me back." Mira's hands stilled. "Would you go?" He met her eyes. "I don't know." She walked over, sat across from him. "Do you miss it?" "I miss knowing what I'm built for." "And you think you're built to command rooms full of tired men who've lost too much blood to care what peace looks like?" He stared at her. "I used to." She reached out, placed her hand over his. "Elias, I don't want to keep you, but I won't follow you into something that will take you away from yourself." He didn't flinch. "Are you asking me to stay?" "No," she said. "I'm asking you to choose." They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the stars crept into the clearing sky, one by one. Inside, beneath the steady hum of recycled air and the soft heartbeat of shared breath, a man who had fought a dozen wars leaned forward and kissed the woman he had invited into his home, never expecting she would plant something in him he hadn't known was missing. Roots. The next morning, he deleted the message and placed another heat lamp beside the Serath vine, because it had begun to climb. By the time spring fell across the upper belt of Raylon 5, Mira's Serath vine had overtaken half the kitchen window. Its green curls wove themselves through the slats of the steel blinds, defiant and wild, just like Mira. It grew wherever it wished, and Elias never tried to tame it. Some mornings he would just sit there with his coffee, watching the way sunlight passed through the translucent leaves, creating patterns on the wall that shimmered when the wind moved. The rhythms of their lives had settled into something quiet and real. Mira now slept in his bed, not because it had been offered again, but because at some point it stopped needing to be. Her clothes hung beside his. Her scent clung to the fabric of the couch, the corners of the hallway, the inside of his jacket when she leaned into him during walks. Elias found he could no longer remember what the house felt like before her voice filled it. One afternoon, she returned from the market with her hands full, tools, fabric, spices, and a single box of reclaimed wood. She set the box down and said nothing, simply dragging it into the sunlit corner of the front room. Over the next few days, she began to build something. She worked with no sketches, just memory and instinct. Elias didn't ask. He simply brought her water, rubbed the soreness from her shoulders at night, and waited. It wasn't until she applied the final polish 2 weeks later that he saw it clearly. A cradle. Not ornate, not ceremonial, practical. Strong. It took his breath in the quietest way. When she caught him staring, Mira crossed the room slowly. Her hands were dusted with sawdust, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "I've been late for 3 moon cycles," she said simply. He blinked. "You're." She nodded. He reached for her hand as though it were a thread he'd feared to lose. "I thought," he began, but stopped. What could he say? That he hadn't expected this? That part of him still didn't believe in futures? She leaned her forehead against his. "I know. I didn't expect it either, but now that it's happening, I want this. I want you. I want us." His voice cracked as it left his mouth. "Me too." Outside, the wind stirred the vines on the window. Inside, he knelt and placed his hands gently on her stomach. And for the first time in years, Elias Ford felt something stronger than duty, louder than command, deeper than silence. He felt awe. News of Elias's withdrawal from the roster had spread further than he expected. Most didn't ask why. Some assumed injury, a few assumed disgrace. Only one ever came looking for the truth. Major Rennick landed on Raylon 5 with little ceremony, dressed not in field gear, but in the darker tones of off-duty command. His boots were still polished, his spine as straight as ever, his face unreadable. Elias met him on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. Didn't think command sent messengers anymore, Elias said, offering the cup. I didn't come from command. Elias raised a brow. Rennick looked around at the modest home, the creeping vines, the quiet hum of domestic life. Word is, you went soft. Elias sipped his tea. Depends on what you think strength looks like. There was a pause. Then quietly, you could have had your own command, whole unit. Your name was already in the air for Colonial Chief of Security. Elias looked toward the house where Mira stood in the window, brushing flour off her hands, then to the small, unfinished nursery beyond the corridor. I have command, Elias said, just not the kind that salutes me. Rennick exhaled, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. She the one who made you give it up. Elias didn't turn back. No, she's the one who reminded me I didn't need to be a weapon forever. They sat in silence for a while. Then Rennick rose. She's not what I pictured for you. She's more than I pictured for myself. Rennick nodded once. Fair enough. Before leaving, he paused at the edge of the porch. When the war flares again, they'll call you. Elias finally turned. Let them. And will you answer? Elias looked toward the nursery again. No, he said, because for once I'll be somewhere that matters more than the fire. Rennick didn't argue. He just walked away. That night, Mira curled beside him, head against his shoulder, her breath warm against his collarbone. You okay? She asked. I am, he whispered, because I've already chosen. And outside, the stars shifted silently in the sky, as if realigning themselves around a truth that didn't need war to be meaningful. Only love. Only life. Only the quiet decision to stay. The baby came with the morning storm. The sky cracked open before the sun, and thunder echoed across the valleys of Raylon 5, rolling like the boots of 1,000 soldiers marching unseen. Rain lashed the walls of the little home Elias had built stronger than any bunker he'd ever stood in, but nothing could muffle the sharp cry that pierced the world from inside their bedroom. Mira's hand crushed his as she groaned through the final push, sweat glistening down her temples, her eyes fierce and unfocused. She was everything in that moment. Warrior, mother, flame. And Elias, for all his years as a soldier, had never felt so fragile, so entirely human, as he did watching her bring life into a world he once believed only knew how to take. The child came swift and wailing, wet and beautiful, with Mira's mouth and Elias's impossible eyes. They wrapped the infant in a cotton wrap Mira had sewn herself, embroidered with the spirals of her people's star paths. She cradled the baby against her chest, whispering in her native tongue, a lullaby that had survived every storm her bloodline had known. Elias sat beside her, stunned, silent by the weight of it. Father. The word hung in his mind like a foreign star, strange at first but luminous. She's strong, Mira whispered. She's perfect, Elias replied. They named her Nyari after a moon that never set. The house changed, the air changed, the way they moved changed. Everything became softer, but also more sacred. There were fewer words now, but more meaning in every glance, every step across the floor in the dead of night, every breath that followed the small, steady rhythm of their daughter's sleep. Elias no longer counted time in days or assignments or patrols. He counted them in heartbeats. Years passed, not quickly, but not slow either. Just steadily, as good years do. The house expanded with them. A second room, then a greenhouse built from salvaged parts of a downed survey station where Mira taught Nyari to sing to the plants, to coax them gently from the soil. Elias built her a wooden sword by hand for her 6th birthday and taught her not how to fight, but how to stand, to know when to raise your voice and when to listen. He never spoke of war, but he spoke of honor, of choice, of how love is the hardest vow to keep, because it must be chosen every single day. Nyari would climb into his lap sometimes, pulling his old medals from their drawer and ask what they were. He'd let her hold them, trace the edges, but he always smiled the same way. Those are reminders, he'd say. But the life we made here, that's the reward. The community changed too. Other families came, drawn by the way Elias and Mira had built something out of nothing. Elias never took charge, but he always seemed to be at the center, the quiet builder, the man who didn't speak often but made every word count. And Mira, she became the soul of the settlement, her wisdom, her art, her fierce, calm strength. She taught the children to weave their stories into fabric, to grow food from broken earth, to speak truth even when it hurt. Together, they became more than a couple. They became roots. And when the stars shifted again, when distant conflict stirred, and Erlon's thighs once more flickered with the threat of war, they did not pack. They did not run. They stood. One evening, Elias stood on the same porch where he had once greeted a soldier from the past. Nyari played nearby, humming a song she had written herself, a mix of her mother's language and his. Mira stepped beside him, her hand sliding into his, familiar and new all at once. "She looks like you," he said. "She listens like you," she replied. They watched their daughter dance under the dusk-lit sky. And Elias, once a weapon, once a wanderer, realized that he had become something else entirely. A place, a beginning. A man who had once offered a stranger warmth for a single night, not knowing he'd been inviting home itself through the door. And he would never close it again.